Hi, my name is Dan, and this video is the first in a series that I'm doing about combat in video games from the perspective of games design, which is in itself part of a wider suite of videos that I'm doing on various aspects of game design. And in this one, I'm going to introduce some basic ideas in combat, and I need to give you a warning that most of this video, and I'm going to keep it quite short, is stating the obvious. And it's just to give the kind of background to set up basically the rest of this series of videos, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Okay, so the first obvious thing is that combat is important as a part of games design. It's a huge aspect of many, many games. Sorry, we got somebody hitting somebody, right? There's somebody shooting somebody, and there's yeah, that's three different examples of combat. This is what they call lightsabers, and even Mario jumps on things and hurts them and can be hurt in return. So there are many varieties of combat that you can have in games. This is not pretending to be a full exhaustive list of all possible types of combat you can have in games. I want to focus in on a few aspects. The solo combat, one person against one other person. The squad combat. Often this is where as a player you control directly one member of your squad and give instructions to the rest. There's RTS type combat where conceptually the player isn't one of the combatants but is controlling them and telling them what to do. So usually they're individually selectable and you can give them instructions, or you want to select them as a group, etc. There's battle combat, so as you're getting bigger, you got larger numbers of people involved, and the gameplay is more about tactical things at a kind of general level, as in the level of somebody who is a general, or strategic decisions. And there's many more types of combat. As I said, that's just about the multiplicity of who's involved. There's grand strategy games have combat in them. There's bullet hell games, which is all about combat. There's space combat. There's sieging. There's assassination type combat, sneaking up on people and doing various nasty things to them. There's sword fighting, but basically this list could just go on and on and on. There are so many different types of combat. I want to focus in on some of the common aspects now of three types of combat, which are quite common in single player games, players where you've got a single character that you're controlling. So I'm going to talk about melee combat, ranged combat, and magical combat as a special case. So melee combat, obviously getting close up and directly involved fighting. So you're up close and personal, and the feelings that you want to be creating of a melee combat experience are of this kind of personal battle between one person and another person. So important aspects that will probably be part of the mechanics of any melee combat system. You need to think about the type of weapon that you're using. You might not have weapons. It might be bare fist, or it might be martial arts type. The direction that you're facing is usually an aspect of this. If you're facing away from the enemy, you can't be hurting them unless you're kicking backwards, maybe. Your distance to your enemy. So most ways of doing melee combat, the reason why they're not ranged combat is because they have a limited distance at which you can hurt somebody. So therefore the reach of the weapon and the distance to the enemy are most important. But actually the reach of their weapon too can be important. Things get different and more interesting if there's a huge disparity in size between the player and the enemy. So maybe the the enemy is absolutely massive, or if the enemy is tiny, then effectively the player is massive. Then some of these things get kind of played around with somewhat. Uh, the speed of attack. So one thing you obviously don't want to be able to do in combat is to just mash a button and swing a sword as fast as the player can actually mash the button, or fists or whatever it is that you're using, as a way to completely dominate the enemy. And so there's always, I say always, almost always, some kind of speed aspect involved in any attack that you make in any of these types of combat. Um, and that can be time from when you press a control to when as the action unfolds, usually done through animation, or it can be using a cooldown. And then you need to think about the damage dealt. Most combat systems work on a health and damage type mechanic. Right, so ranged combat is similar in some ways, but has a few differences. There's a picture of Lara Croft. So you're doing it from a distance, and the feel of ranged combat should be one of more of control and of kind of being somewhat aloof um, from the action, but you maybe have a kind of timing element that you need to get dealing with them quickly. Otherwise, they'll come and get you, and then you're in melee combat, and maybe you're not strong at melee combat, or that you're firing at each other from a distance if it's on guns, for example. Um, so important aspects of ranged combat: accuracy and aiming. How are you going to know whether the player has been accurate enough to be able to hit the enemy? What is the range? So how far away are you? Again, how are you going to deal with damage? How are you going to calculate the damage that is dealt to the player and to the enemy? Again, speed is an aspect. You don't want to be able to just spam your arrows as fast as you possibly can. There are obviously some guns that spit out bullets. Machine guns do it as a regular timed thing and very quickly. So depending on the kind of weapon. Um, Cover then starts to come into play once you've got ranged combat. I guess you could use cover as an aspect of melee combat, but it's somewhat unusual. It's much more likely for cover to come into range combat with guns, particularly, but with any kind of weapon that you use at a distance. Is it possible for you and or your enemy to hide or partially hide behind things? And then evasive action. Um, how do you deal with the possibility of not just cover but zigzagging, for example, running erratically to try and make yourself a harder target to hit? And then finally, I'm going to talk about magical combat as a special case. Obviously, we're unlikely to ever have Call of Duty, the magical combat, but some games do. I'm a sucker for fantasy games myself, so I come across this quite a lot. So there's a picture of some. Yes, this is Magica. So the core feel for magical combat is about power, and any magic system in a game should be giving the player a feeling of this otherworldly power that they're wielding, and you don't feel this any more strongly in a game at any point more than combat, I would say. So you need to be able to do things in your combat that make you feel like you are in some way superior to normal human beings or whatever you're playing as. So important aspects uh, of magical combat is, again, it's usually mostly ranged combat, so it's similar aspects to the ranged stuff that I was just talking about. You might have some added things, though. You might have area of effect spells, uh, which is kind of like an explosive, so it does damage in a not just to a point or to one particular enemy, but potentially to several enemies, either within a radius or a diminishing amount, depending on how far you are from an epicenter. You might also have what are sometimes called buffs and debuffs, and they might be called other things. There might be blesses and curses. So magical effects that effectively affect affect other characters with status or yourself as well, um, which kind of sit and affect the player over a period of time, again, or the enemy. I think you know what I'm talking about. I feel like I haven't necessarily explained that perfectly for a novice. And imagination and power, and being able to use the fact that whatever your system of magic is, that it gives you some kind of powerful feeling. But that can be uh, folded in with the idea, imaginative use. There's all sorts of things you can do with magic. Once you've got a magic system, depending on how you've designed it, your limitations are very different to the physical world. And so you may be able to uh, conjure up golems to fight for you. You may be able to make the stones in the floor rise up and hit your enemies in the face. You may be able to uh, um, make enemies befuddled, and so that they attack their uh, who were people who were their allies. All sorts of things, and magical combat allows you to open that door. But once you have opened that door, there is then the call to the designer to use their imagination and produce some interesting ways of dealing with magical combat. So that's been a quick run through, as I say, some of the obvious aspects of combat. And we're setting up in the next few videos that are going to be in this series, we're going to be focusing in on various things. We're going to be looking at the second by second play of combat. We're going to look at tactics in combat. We're going to look at common combat systems. We're going to look at some design thoughts, and then there'll be a load of examples videos that look at particular games and how combat is dealt with in those games. And then there's going to be some exercises if you're trying to teach yourself how to be a game designer, or you're part of one of my modules, then these exercises might be things that you actively do yourself. So that's it from me for now.